You had no right to tear down my bridge, Constance.
Actually, Clayton, I had every right. Emergency safety violation. Your pathetic little bridge was a liability.
She said that in my driveway, just 3 days after I buried my wife, Sarah. While I was at her funeral, Constance Blackwood, the new HOA president, sent crews to demolish our 130-year-old family bridge, the very bridge where I proposed to Sarah, where we drank coffee every morning watching the sun rise over the lake for 30 years. She called it pathetic. She thought a grieving widower wouldn't fight back. But that little bridge wasn't just wood. It was the only thing controlling the dam that fed the entire lake. Labor Day weekend was her big moment. Grand opening, 800 VIP guests, a $12 million luxury resort built around that water. What she didn't know could fill an ocean, literally. Where are you watching from? Have you ever seen someone's arrogance come back to drown them? Let me paint you the full picture. Sarah and I bought our little slice of paradise in Lakeside Estates 15 years ago, back when it was just a quiet community of folks who wanted peace and quiet by the water. The property came with something special. My great-grandfather Henrik's original dam from 1890, built when this whole area was still territorial land. That old Norwegian immigrant knew what he was doing. The concrete and stone structure controlled the flow from Miller's Creek into what's now called Paradise Lake. Henrik's handwritten deed, still hanging in my kitchen, granted him exclusive and perpetual water rights to regulate the creek's flow. Back then, water rights were serious business. First come, first served, and Henrik was definitely first. Sarah fell in love with the covered bridge that connected our main property to the small island where Henrik had built his dam controls. The bridge was pure Americana, weathered timber, hand-forged iron hinges, and a little roof that kept you dry during summer storms. Every morning, Sarah would walk out there with her coffee, checking on the wildflowers she'd planted around Henrik's old stone foundation. The smell of her lavender coffee always mixed with the cedar planks warming in the sunrise. I can still hear the gentle creak of those boards under her feet. Everything started changing 5 years ago when Blackwood Development bought up half the lake's shoreline. Constance Blackwood, the company's Ice Queen CEO, had this vision of transforming our sleepy community into the Hamptons of the Midwest. She pushed through HOA rule after HOA rule, mandatory landscaping, architectural committees, aesthetic compliance inspections. Then came the resort. $12 million of glass, steel, and pure ego rising from the eastern shore. Infinity pools, a floating restaurant, spa treatments using natural spring water, which was really just treated lake water with fancy marketing. The construction noise alone drove away half the wildlife Sarah loved watching from our bridge. Constance became HOA president through what I call checkbook democracy. She bought out 3 board members and intimidated the rest. Suddenly, every property improvement needed her personal approval. Paint colors, garden layouts, even mailbox styles fell under her iron fist. But here's where her business degree failed her. She never researched water rights. Constance just assumed that controlling the HOA meant controlling everything in the community, including the lake itself. Her fancy resort was pumping 2 million gallons daily for those infinity pools, artificial waterfalls, and spa treatments. The lake level dropped 2 feet that first summer, killing fish and exposing muddy shorelines. Sarah got sick during the resort's construction phase. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, discovered way too late. The doctors said 18 months. She fought for 2 years. During chemo, our morning walks to the bridge became her anchor, the one place where she could still feel peaceful despite everything. I was holding Sarah's hand on that bridge when she asked me to scatter her ashes from the island. She wanted to become part of Henrik's legacy, part of the water that sustained everything downstream. We had 8 more months together after that conversation. Sarah passed on a Tuesday in January. The memorial service was scheduled for September 15th, the anniversary of our engagement on that same bridge 30 years earlier. I'd invited maybe 20 people, just family and close friends who understood how much that spot meant to us. The morning of the service, I drove to the cemetery with Sarah's urn in the passenger seat, still talking to her like I had every day since she'd been gone. Today's the day, sweetheart. Everyone's going to hear your stories. I came home 3 hours later to find tire tracks, concrete dust, and splinters where our bridge used to be. A notice stapled to my front door declared the bridge an emergency structural hazard requiring immediate removal for community safety. Constance had timed it perfectly. She knew I'd be defenseless, surrounded by grieving family, unable to fight back while honoring Sarah's memory. That woman had no idea what she'd just started. The next morning, I stood at my shoreline staring at the gap where 30 years of memories used to be. Henrik's Island was only 50 feet away, but it might as well have been 50 miles. The dam controls were over there, completely inaccessible. Constance had effectively stranded me from my own property. I called the HOA office at exactly 9 a.m. The receptionist, probably making minimum wage, apologized profusely but said Ms. Blackwood was unavailable for routine member concerns. Routine member concerns, like destroying someone's private property while they're burying their wife. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from Pemberton, Cale & Associates, one of those law firms that charges $800 to sharpen their pencils. The letter was 3 pages of legal threats wrapped around a simple message. My antiquated dam structure violated modern safety codes and posed catastrophic flood risks to the resort and community. They demanded I hire a licensed engineer to perform a $60,000 safety assessment within 30 days. Followed by whatever critical upgrades their expert recommended. The letter helpfully suggested I contact Blackwood Engineering Solutions, Constance's other company, for a competitive quote on the work. It was textbook extortion with a legal bow tie. My savings account, already drained by 2 years of Sarah's medical bills, couldn't handle a $60,000 shakedown. But here's what Constance didn't know about Army Corps engineers. We're taught to read the ground like a book, and we never throw away paperwork. I spent that weekend in my basement digging through Henrik's old documents, property surveys from 1890, territorial water compacts, even correspondence with the local Ojibwe tribe about shared fishing rights. Most of it was routine historical stuff, but one document made my pulse quicken. The original territorial water compact wasn't just a property deed, it was a binding agreement between Henrik Riverside, the territory of Minnesota, and the Gull Lake Ojibwe Band. Henrik had negotiated exclusive authority to regulate Miller's Creek flow in exchange for maintaining year-round fishing access for tribal members. Here's what most people don't understand about water rights law. They're older and stronger than almost any other property rights in America. The legal principle is called prior appropriation. First in time, first in right. Henrik's 1890 water compact predated Minnesota statehood, let alone Blackwood Development's 2018 resort permits. I made copies of everything and drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk, a patient woman named Janet who'd worked there since dinosaurs roamed the earth, helped me trace the property's legal history. Every deed transfer, every easement, every zoning change, it was all there in black and white. The real shocker came when Janet pulled up the resort's current permits. Blackwood Development had filed for recreational water usage permits allowing up to 50,000 gallons daily for landscaping and pool maintenance. Nothing about 2 million gallons for infinity pools and artificial waterfalls. "Honey," Janet said, adjusting her reading glasses, "looks like someone's been a very naughty developer." I requested certified copies of Henrik's water compact and every document related to the resort's permits. Janet charged me $47, best money I ever spent. That evening I called Blackwood Development's main number. The receptionist transferred me directly to Constance's personal line. Apparently, property owners facing legal action got VIP treatment. "Clayton," Constance's voice dripped fake concern. "I heard about your bridge situation. So unfortunate, but public safety must come first." "Funny thing about public safety," I replied. "I've been reviewing water usage permits for your resort. Seems like you're using 40 times more water than legally authorized." The silence lasted exactly 7 seconds. I counted. "I'm sure there's been some paperwork oversight," she finally said. "These things happen with large projects." "They sure do, especially when someone builds a $12 million resort without securing proper water rights from the upstream property owner." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Perhaps we should discuss this in person. I'm sure we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement." "Oh, I'm sure we can. But first, I need access to my dam controls. You know, the ones on the island your demolition team cut me off from. That bridge was structurally unsound. According to whose assessment, I don't recall authorizing any structural engineers on my property." The conversation ended with Constance promising to look into the bridge situation while I promised to research water law more thoroughly. We both knew exactly what those promises meant. Translation: the chess match had officially begun. Constance's next move came exactly 1 week later, and it was pure scorched earth. Instead of addressing the water rights issue, she decided to double down on intimidation. I woke up Thursday morning to find my driveway blocked by a county code enforcement truck. Officer Murphy, a decent guy I'd known for years, looked embarrassed as he handed me a citation. "Sorry, Clayton. Anonymous complaint about unpermitted structures on your property. I have to cite you for the old stone foundation on your island. Henrik's original dam foundation, the one Sarah had turned into a memorial garden, was now classified as an unpermitted accessory structure in violation of county setback requirements. The fine was $500, with daily penalties until I either brought it into compliance or removed it entirely. Of course, I couldn't remove anything without access to the island Constance had cut me off from. But that was just the opening move. Over the next 2 weeks, I received citations for unmaintained waterfront vegetation, Sarah's wildflower garden, unauthorized water diversion, Henrik's dam, and my personal favorite, failure to maintain sightlines for emergency vehicle access because my split-rail fence supposedly blocked fire truck visibility. Each citation carried mounting daily fees. The county was billing me $400 a day for violations I couldn't access to fix. Pure bureaucratic genius. The smell of diesel fuel started hanging around my property. Murphy mentioned increased patrol frequency in the area. Constance was making sure I understood how many friends she had in the county administration. Meanwhile, the resort's water consumption was becoming impossible to ignore. Paradise Lake had dropped another foot, exposing 20 yards of muddy shoreline dotted with beer cans and old fishing lures. The water temperature was rising too, concentrated in a smaller volume, heating up under the August sun, creating algae blooms that smelled like rotten eggs. I started documenting everything. Water level measurements, temperature readings, photos of the exposed shoreline. My military training had taught me that intelligence gathering beats emotional reactions every time. Then came the breakthrough I needed. I was reviewing the resort's business license application when I noticed something odd. Blackwood Development had listed their water source as municipal supply supplemented by on-site wells. No mention of lake water. But their actual usage was clearly drawing directly from Paradise Lake through a massive intake pipe I could see from my deck. Here's something most people don't know about water rights. Stealing water is theft, just like stealing someone's car. And in Minnesota, unauthorized water diversion is a felony if it exceeds 100,000 gallons annually. The resort was stealing over 700 million gallons per year. I drove to the State Department of Natural Resources office in Brainerd, a 2-hour round trip through farm country that gave me plenty of time to plan my next move. The DNR investigator, a sharp woman named Lisa Smith, reviewed my documentation with growing interest. "Mr. Riverside, if what you're showing me is accurate, this resort is operating without any legal water rights whatsoever. They filed for a 50,000-gallon recreational permit, but they're actually using industrial-scale quantities." She pulled up the resort's original environmental impact assessment. "Look at this. Their EIA assumes minimal water usage, pool filling, landscape irrigation, basic hospitality needs. Nothing about infinity pools or artificial waterfalls." Lisa explained the state's enforcement process: formal investigation, cease and desist order, criminal referral if warranted. But the best part was her timeline estimate. "We can have investigators on site within 2 weeks. If your documentation holds up, we'll issue an immediate stop-use order pending full compliance." Translation: the state could shut off the resort's water supply faster than Constance could say, "lawsuit." I drove home feeling hopeful for the first time in months. But Constance wasn't done playing games. That evening, I found my mailbox stuffed with legal papers. Not from her fancy law firm this time. This was a personal lawsuit filed by Constance Blackwood against Clayton Riverside, seeking $200,000 in damages for intentional interference with business operations and malicious harassment. The complaint alleged I was spreading false rumors about the resort's permits and threatening to sabotage the water supply in retaliation for legitimate code enforcement actions. She was claiming my water rights research constituted criminal intimidation. But here's where Constance made her biggest mistake. She filed the lawsuit in her husband's court. Judge Frederick Blackwood was presiding over a case where his wife was suing a community member over water rights that affected her business. Even in small-town Minnesota, that kind of conflict of interest doesn't fly. I called the State Judicial Ethics Board the next morning. Sometimes the best defense is pointing out when your opponent is cheating. Judge Blackwood recused himself within 48 hours of my ethics complaint, but not before Constance escalated to tactics that crossed every line of decency. The phone calls started at 3 a.m., heavy breathing, then silence. Sometimes classical music playing softly before the line went dead. Never anything directly threatening, too smart for that, but the message was clear. We know where you live, and we can reach you anytime. I dealt with psychological warfare in my military days, so the amateur hour intimidation didn't rattle me much. What did get my attention was finding my truck's brake lines partially cut 3 days later, not completely severed. That would have been obvious sabotage. Instead, someone had carefully nicked the lines so they'd fail gradually under pressure. If I hadn't been checking my vehicle daily since the phone calls started, I might have discovered the problem by rolling through the stop sign at Highway 12 doing 40 miles per hour. Murphy ran fingerprints on the brake lines but found nothing. Probably just corrosion, he suggested, though we both knew better. Coincidences like that don't happen in the real world. The psychological pressure was working, though not the way Constance intended. Instead of breaking me down, it was clarifying my priorities. Sarah used to say that grief was just love with nowhere to go. Well, now I had somewhere to direct it. I installed trail cameras around my property. Military-grade units that transmitted directly to my phone. Motion sensors, night vision, the works. If someone wanted to play surveillance games, we'd play by professional rules. The cameras paid off within a week. At 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, I watched Judge Frederick Blackwood walk across my property line carrying surveying equipment. The man was literally trespassing to gather intelligence for his wife's lawsuit against me. I watched him for 20 minutes through the camera feed, documenting his every move. He measured distances from my shoreline to the dam, took photos of Henrik's foundation, even collected water samples in small vials. The whole time, his BMW sat parked on the county road with hazard lights blinking. This was beyond conflict of interest. This was criminal trespassing by a sitting judge on behalf of a plaintiff in active litigation. The next morning, I drove to the FBI field office in Minneapolis with a flash drive containing 40 minutes of high-definition footage. Special Agent Maria Santos reviewed the material with the kind of professional interest that told me Judge Blackwood's judicial career was about to get very complicated. Mr. Riverside, this is exactly the kind of public corruption case we take seriously. A sitting judge conducting surveillance on behalf of his wife's financial interests while she's in litigation? That's federal territory. But Constance wasn't done. Her next move was so audacious it almost impressed me. I came home from grocery shopping to find a certified letter waiting. Not legal papers this time, but a generous settlement offer typed on Blackwood Development letterhead. $300,000 to resolve all outstanding disputes and transfer my property rights to a community trust managed by the HOA. The letter was warm, almost motherly in tone. Constance understood my grief, respected my military service, wanted to honor Sarah's memory by creating a peaceful resolution that would benefit everyone. She even offered to build a memorial bridge, more beautiful than the original, as part of the settlement. $300,000 was actually fair market value for my property, maybe even generous, considering the legal fees I was already facing. For someone living on a military pension with mounting medical debt, it represented financial security and an end to this nightmare. I sat on my deck that evening, reading the offer while watching the resort's lights reflect off the dropping lake surface. This was Constance's smartest move yet, offering just enough money to make surrender tempting while wrapping it in language about honoring Sarah's memory. But here's what she still didn't understand. This was never about money. I walked to my shoreline and looked across the gap where our bridge used to be. Sarah's memorial garden was over there, unreachable, slowly being overtaken by weeds because I couldn't maintain it. Henrik's legacy was over there, a century of family history that Constance wanted to buy with a check. Some things aren't for sale. I called her personal number at 9 p.m. sharp. She answered on the first ring, probably expecting good news. Constance, I reviewed your generous offer. And? Counteroffer. Restore my bridge, shut down your illegal water theft, and publicly apologize for destroying private property during a memorial service. Then we can discuss your resort's future water access. The silence stretched for 15 seconds this time. Clayton, you're making a very expensive mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. 3 days after rejecting Constance's settlement offer, I made the discovery that changed everything. I was digitizing Henrik's papers for safekeeping when I found an envelope I'd somehow missed in my earlier searches. Thick, legal-sized, with territorial water compact, official copy, written in Henrik's careful script. Inside was a document that made my heart race. The 1890 Territorial Water Compact wasn't just about fishing rights. It was a comprehensive agreement that granted Henrik absolute authority over Miller's Creek flow, including the right to regulate, restrict, or redirect water flow for any purpose deemed necessary by the property owner or his lawful heirs. But the real bombshell was in Section 7. Should any downstream development interfere with the natural watershed or create environmental degradation, the upstream controller retains full authority to modify water allocation to restore ecological balance. Henrik hadn't just negotiated water rights, he'd negotiated environmental protection authority that predated the EPA by 80 years. I read the document 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. Then I called the tribal attorney who'd been helping me research water law. James Kingbird had 30 years of experience with water rights cases and access to tribal legal databases most lawyers never see. "Clayton, this document is extraordinary," James said after reviewing the scanned pages. "Territorial compacts like this carry the force of federal treaty law. They supersede state regulations, county ordinances, even most federal environmental rules. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Constance's $12 million resort wasn't just operating without proper permits. It was violating a federal treaty that gave me authority to protect the watershed. James, what does this mean in practical terms?" "It means you have legal authority to regulate water flow to protect environmental balance. If the resort is causing ecological damage, and your documentation clearly shows it is, you can cut their water supply completely. No court order required, no environmental impact study needed. The treaty gives you unilateral authority." Henrik had known something that modern developers had forgotten. Water rights aren't just about access, they're about stewardship. The old Norwegian had negotiated protection for the entire watershed, knowing that future generations might need those protections. I spent the next 2 days documenting the resort's environmental impact. The lake level had dropped 3 feet total, concentrating pollutants and raising water temperature to levels that were killing fish. The artificial waterfalls and infinity pools were creating circulation patterns that disrupted natural spawning areas. Even the floating restaurant was dumping gray water that exceeded permit limits. But here's the part that sealed the deal. The tribal fishing rights that Henrik had helped protect were being violated. The Gull Lake Ojibwe Band had treaty rights to fish these waters, but the resort's water theft had destroyed the seasonal spawning grounds that tribal members had used for generations. James connected me with tribal chairman Robert Skinaway, whose grandfather had signed the original 1890 compact alongside Henrik. Chairman Skinaway reviewed my evidence with growing anger. "This resort has destroyed fishing areas my family has used for over a century. Our tribal council has been discussing legal action, but we didn't know about the environmental authority in your compact." The tribal government offered their full legal support, including access to federal environmental attorneys and water rights specialists. Suddenly, Constance wasn't just fighting a grieving widower. She was fighting a federal treaty violation with tribal sovereignty backing. I drove to the county courthouse that afternoon and filed a formal notice with the water commissioner, citing the 1890 Territorial Water Compact and declaring my intention to exercise environmental protection authority over Miller's Creek flow to restore ecological balance. The filing was public record. Within 2 hours, local reporters started calling for comments. By evening, the story was spreading on social media. Local man claims treaty rights to control resort water supply. Constance's response came via her lawyer the next morning. A furious cease and desist letter threatening criminal charges if I interfered with lawful business operations. But here's what she still didn't understand. I wasn't interfering with anything. I was exercising authority that Henrik had negotiated 133 years ago to protect these waters for future generations. Sarah would have loved the poetic justice. The bridge she cherished had connected us to legal power that Constance never saw coming. Translation: the game had completely changed, and Constance was playing by rules that no longer existed. With federal treaty authority backing my water rights, I finally had the legal firepower to match Constance's resources. But legal power means nothing without tactical execution, and that's where my engineering background became crucial. The old dam was actually a masterpiece of 19th century hydraulic engineering. Henrik had built manual gate controls, massive iron wheels that opened and closed water channels through the concrete structure. No electricity, no computerized systems, just mechanical leverage and Norwegian engineering that had operated flawlessly for over a century. But I needed access to those controls, and that meant building a bridge. I contacted Jerry Haugen, a retired structural engineer who'd been Sarah's favorite neighbor. Jerry had helped Henrik maintain the dam back in the 1980s and understood the historical significance of what we were protecting. "Clayton, I've been watching that resort poison our lake for 2 years," Jerry said as we surveyed the gap from my shoreline. "Building you a bridge isn't just about access, it's about environmental justice." Jerry designed a temporary footbridge using aluminum decking and steel cable supports. Nothing fancy, but engineered to handle Minnesota weather and heavy equipment. We could have it installed in 3 days using Jerry's construction contacts. While Jerry handled the bridge design, I focused on legal strategy with James Kingbird and the tribal attorneys. The 1890 compact gave me environmental authority, but exercising it required following proper notification procedures. Federal treaty law requires 60 days notice before major water allocation changes, James explained, but we can implement temporary restrictions immediately if there's ongoing environmental damage. The tribal legal team had documented decades of ecological data showing the lake's natural rhythm. Fish spawning patterns, seasonal water levels, temperature fluctuations, all disrupted by the resort's massive water consumption. Their scientific evidence would support whatever action I took. Meanwhile, I was learning the mechanical intricacies of Henrik's dam controls. The system used a series of adjustable gates that could regulate flow from complete stoppage to full release. Each gate controlled specific downstream areas, allowing precise water management. Here's something most people don't know about manual dam operations. You can control water flow so gradually that downstream users don't notice changes until it's too late. Modern electronic systems shut off like light switches, but mechanical controls can create slow, steady reductions that look like natural drought conditions. I spent hours studying Henrik's handwritten operation logs from the 1920s and 30s. The old Norwegian had recorded every adjustment, every seasonal change, every response to downstream requests. His notes revealed sophisticated understanding of watershed management that most modern engineers would envy. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I wouldn't shut off water flow immediately. That would trigger emergency injunctions and probably get me arrested. Instead, I'd gradually reduce flow over several weeks, mimicking natural dry conditions, while giving Constance time to realize what was happening. Jerry's bridge crew worked around the clock to install our access span. By Friday afternoon, I was walking across sturdy aluminum decking to Henrik's Island for the first time since the original bridge demolition. Standing at the dam controls felt like greeting an old friend. The iron wheels were exactly as Henrik had left them, inscribed with Norwegian markings indicating flow rates and seasonal settings. Sarah's memorial garden surrounded the control house, overgrown now but still beautiful in its wild state. I spent that evening cleaning and lubricating the gate mechanisms, testing each control wheel to ensure smooth operation. Everything worked perfectly. Henrik had built these controls to last centuries, not decades. The tactical timeline was crucial. Labor Day weekend was the resort's biggest revenue event of the year. Constance had marketed it as Lakeside Luxury Weekend, with premium pricing and national travel magazine coverage. 800 VIP guests paying $5,000 per night, plus day use fees for spa treatments and marina services. If water levels dropped during their showcase weekend, the financial and publicity damage would be catastrophic. Boats stranded in mud, empty pools, spa treatments canceled. Exactly the kind of visual disaster that kills luxury hospitality businesses. But timing wasn't just about maximizing Constance's embarrassment. The 60-day legal notice period would expire on August 30th, giving me authority to implement emergency environmental protection measures starting September 1st. Perfect timing. Legal authority active just as their biggest weekend began. I filed the required notifications with the County Water Commissioner, State DNR, and Tribal Environmental Office. Each filing cited specific environmental damages and outlined my intention to restore ecological balance through graduated flow reduction. Translation: Constance would have legal warning that her water supply was about to disappear, but the language was bureaucratic enough that she might not understand the immediate threat. Sometimes the best revenge is giving your enemy exactly what they deserve, wrapped in enough legal protection that they can't stop you from delivering it. Constance's response to my legal filings was swift, desperate, and completely predictable. Within 48 hours of my environmental notice, she launched a full-scale assault designed to destroy my credibility and legal standing. The first salvo came through her pet county inspector. Murphy showed up at my door looking genuinely sorry, carrying a stack of citations thick enough to shingle a roof. "Clayton, I'm required to inform you that your property is now under emergency county review for multiple code violations." He handed me papers citing everything from unpermitted bridge construction to unauthorized modification of waterway structures. The bridge Jerry had built was apparently an illegal access structure installed without proper engineering review. Never mind that Jerry was a licensed structural engineer with 40 years of experience. The county wanted their own expert to conduct a safety assessment that would cost $12,000 and take 6 weeks to complete. But the real kicker was the environmental hazard citation. Someone had filed a complaint claiming my dam was creating stagnant water conditions that posed public health risks. The county was demanding immediate water flow increases to restore proper circulation. Pure bureaucratic genius, forcing me to increase water flow while I was planning to decrease it. "Murphy, who filed these complaints?" Anonymous tip through our environmental hotline. "But Clayton," he lowered his voice, "I've lived here 30 years. That dam's never caused health problems before this summer." Constance was using the system against me, but she'd made one critical mistake. Every complaint had to be investigated by state environmental regulators. Her anonymous tips were creating an official paper trail that documented the resort's water theft. The second wave came through social media. Suddenly, Lakeside Estates Facebook groups were flooded with posts about dangerous dam conditions and aging infrastructure threats. Anonymous accounts shared grainy photos of my property with captions like, "Is this 130-year-old dam safe for our families?" Someone had launched a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to turn community sentiment against me. The posts were too polished, too coordinated to be organic community concern. Then came the attempted bribery. I was testing the dam controls Wednesday evening when a BMW pulled up to my new bridge access point. Out stepped Thomas Cale, senior partner from Constance's law firm, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of smile that costs $800 per hour. "Clayton, we need to discuss a reasonable resolution to this situation." Cale explained that his clients, he never mentioned Constance by name, were prepared to offer significant compensation for a mutually beneficial agreement. Not the $300,000 from before, but $500,000, plus agreement to rebuild my bridge using historically appropriate materials. "Your water rights would remain intact," Cale assured me. "We're simply asking for a long-term usage agreement that guarantees adequate flow for existing downstream operations." Translation: they wanted to buy guaranteed water access for their illegal resort operation. The briefcase contained contracts pre-signed by Constance, waiting only for my signature to transfer specific water usage rights in exchange for what amounted to a $500,000 payment. Everything legal, everything documented, everything designed to let the resort continue its environmental destruction with my official blessing. "Mr. Cale, I appreciate the offer, but some things aren't for sale." His professional smile never wavered. "Clayton, I understand the emotional significance of this property, but consider the practical reality. You're facing significant legal expenses, ongoing code enforcement actions, and potential environmental liability. This agreement resolves everything cleanly." He was right about the legal pressure. Between county citations, state investigations, and Constance's ongoing harassment, my legal bills were mounting toward $20,000. The settlement would cover those costs 10 times over while ending the bureaucratic warfare. "I'll consider your offer," I told him, accepting the contracts. "Give me 48 hours. After Cale left, I sat on my deck reading through 50 pages of legal language designed to transfer my environmental authority to a community water management trust controlled by the HOA board. Brilliant legal work that would give Constance everything she wanted while appearing to respect my historical rights. That night, I called James Kingbird to review the settlement offer. "Clayton, this contract effectively neuters your environmental authority. You'd retain ownership of the water rights, but lose ability to regulate flow for environmental protection. They're buying your treaty power. What happens if I sign? Their water theft becomes legal, the resort gets guaranteed supply, the lake ecosystem continues deteriorating, and tribal fishing rights remain violated. But you'd be financially secure and legally protected from further harassment." I spent hours walking through Sarah's memorial garden, weighing financial security against environmental responsibility. Henrik had negotiated those water rights to protect the watershed for future generations. Sarah had loved these waters because they represented something pure in an increasingly corrupted world. By morning, my decision was clear. Some fights are worth having regardless of cost. With 5 days until Labor Day weekend, Constance abandoned all pretense of legal warfare and shifted to pure sabotage. I discovered the first attack Thursday morning when I walked out to check the dam controls. Someone had been busy overnight. Very busy. The manual gate wheels were jammed with quick-setting concrete, hardened into immovable lumps that rendered the entire control system inoperable. Professional work, too. Whoever did this understood hydraulic engineering well enough to disable the controls without damaging the dam structure itself. They'd left the gates in their current position, about 60% open, ensuring continued water flow while preventing any adjustments. Jerry Haugen drove over within an hour of my call, took one look at the sabotage and started cursing in Norwegian. "Clayton, this is sophisticated vandalism. They knew exactly which components to target. We're looking at 2 days minimum to remove this concrete and rebuild the control mechanisms." 2 days that would take us past the legal deadline for implementing environmental restrictions. Constance's timing was perfect. Disable my controls just close enough to Labor Day that repairs wouldn't be complete until after her showcase weekend. But here's what she didn't know about Army Corps engineers. We always have backup plans. While Jerry assessed the damage to the primary controls, I was examining Henrik's original engineering drawings. The clever Norwegian had built redundant systems into his dam design. The main gate wheels controlled primary flow, but there was also a manual bypass system, a series of removable concrete slabs that could completely shut off water flow if necessary. Henrik's notes explained the bypass system was designed for emergency drought protection or complete maintenance shutdowns. The slabs were stored in a waterproof chamber built into the dam's foundation, accessible through a hidden panel that looked like decorative stonework. Friday morning brought the second wave of sabotage. I woke to find my truck's tires slashed and sugar poured into the gas tank. Classic intimidation tactics, but also a strategic move to limit my mobility during the crucial weekend period. The message was clear: stay home and stay quiet while we celebrate our victory. I called the sheriff's department to report the vandalism. Deputy Rodriguez took detailed photos and dusted for fingerprints, but we both knew the investigation would take weeks and probably yield nothing. Professional vandals don't leave evidence. "Mr. Riverside, I've got to ask, do you have somewhere else you could stay this weekend? Things seem to be escalating and I'm worried about your safety." I appreciated the concern, but running wasn't an option, not when I was this close to implementing Henrik's Environmental Protection Authority. Saturday brought the psychological warfare. Starting at 6 a.m., a parade of vehicles drove slowly past my property. Different cars, different license plates, but the same intimidation message. Black SUVs, white pickup trucks, even a Mercedes sedan with tinted windows. Each driver stared at my house as they passed, making sure I noticed their surveillance. The resort's grand opening was scheduled for Sunday afternoon, with VIP guests arriving throughout the weekend. Local media was covering the event as a major economic development story. 300 jobs, 12 million in investment, luxury tourism putting our little community on the map. But Saturday evening brought the breakthrough I needed. Jerry had been working steadily to free the gate controls when he discovered something interesting. The concrete jamming the mechanisms wasn't generic construction cement. It was a specialized quick-set formula used primarily for underwater repairs. "Clayton, only 2 companies in the county stock this specific concrete. I know because I've used it for marina repairs. This stuff costs $40 per bag and requires special mixing equipment." A few phone calls to Jerry's construction contacts revealed that Blackwood Development had purchased 8 bags of underwater concrete Friday morning, claiming they needed it for emergency resort maintenance. Perfect. Constance had used traceable materials for her sabotage operation. But more importantly, Jerry's careful removal of the concrete had revealed that the gate mechanisms were undamaged. We could have primary flow controls operational by Sunday morning, exactly when I needed them. The final escalation came Saturday night. I was reviewing Henrik's bypass instructions when motion sensors triggered around my property. This time it wasn't surveillance vehicles. 3 figures in dark clothing were approaching the dam island on foot, carrying what looked like cutting tools. I watched through trail camera feeds as they examined the manual gate mechanisms, apparently planning to complete the sabotage job they'd started earlier. But they didn't know about the cameras, and they didn't know about the bypass system. I called 911 and reported trespassers vandalizing critical infrastructure. Then I called the tribal police. James Kingbird had explained that dam sabotage on treaty-protected land gave tribal authorities concurrent jurisdiction. By the time law enforcement arrived, the saboteurs were gone, but my cameras had captured 40 minutes of high-definition footage showing 3 people methodically attempting to destroy water control infrastructure. Translation: Constance's final desperate move had just provided me with perfect evidence of criminal conspiracy. Labor Day Sunday dawned clear and humid, perfect weather for Constance's grand opening disaster. By 7 a.m., I was at the dam controls making final preparations. Jerry had worked through the night to restore the primary gate systems, while I'd tested the bypass mechanisms twice to ensure they'd function when needed. Everything was ready. The resort parking lots were already filling with luxury vehicles, BMW sedans, Mercedes SUVs, even a few Teslas with out-of-state plates. The travel and leisure photographers had arrived early to capture golden hour shots of the infinity pools and floating restaurant. Local TV crews were setting up for live broadcasts highlighting our community's economic transformation. 800 VIP guests paying $5,000 per night, plus hundreds of day-use visitors for the spa and marina. Constance had marketed this weekend as the Midwest's answer to the Hamptons, complete with celebrity chef demonstrations and natural spring spa treatments. What none of them knew was that their natural spring treatments were about to become mud baths. At 9 a.m. sharp, I began Henrik's environmental protection protocol. The beauty of manual dam controls is their precision. Instead of digital on-off switches, the iron gate wheels allowed gradual adjustments measured in inches of flow restriction. I started with a modest reduction, closing the gates by approximately 10%, which would drop lake levels by about 2 inches over the next hour. Subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice immediately, but significant enough to affect the resort's water-dependent operations. At 10:30, the first sign of trouble appeared. The floating restaurant's kitchen staff noticed their water pressure dropping during breakfast prep. Marina attendants reported that several boat slips were showing shallow water warnings on their depth gauges. By noon, the infinity pools were visibly lower. The artificial waterfalls had become artificial trickles. Spa guests were complaining that their rejuvenating spring treatments felt more like sitting in puddles. At 12:30, I implemented the second phase, reducing flow by another 20%. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Lake levels dropped 4 inches in 30 minutes, exposing muddy shorelines dotted with decades of accumulated trash. Beer cans, fishing lures, even an old shopping cart became visible in areas that had been underwater that morning. Travel and leisure photographers were frantically repositioning their equipment, trying to avoid shots of the expanding mud flats. Local TV crews started asking resort staff uncomfortable questions about unusual water conditions. At 1 p.m., Constance's white Tesla came screaming down the resort driveway. I watched through binoculars as she gestured frantically at the dropping lake levels, clearly demanding explanations from staff who had no answers. That's when I implemented the final phase of Henrik's Environmental Protection Authority. Using the manual bypass system, I gradually closed all remaining gates over the course of 15 minutes. Not a complete shutdown that would have triggered emergency protocols, but a reduction to approximately 5% of normal flow. The transformation was spectacular. Paradise Lake began draining like a bathtub with the plug pulled. Within an hour, the marina was a muddy graveyard of stranded boats. 60-foot yachts sat tilted in the muck like expensive tombstones. The floating restaurant was no longer floating. It sat level with the shore, its overwater dining experience now a sitting in dried lake bed experience. The infinity pools had become concrete craters. The spa's natural water treatments were canceled due to temporary supply interruptions. Even the resort's elaborate fountains had fallen silent, leaving only the mechanical hum of pumps trying to move water that no longer existed. At 3 p.m., with 200 VIP guests demanding refunds and local media documenting the luxury disaster, Constance finally drove to my property. She arrived with Sheriff Martinez, County Attorney Peterson, and a camera crew from Channel 7 News. I was waiting on my deck, drinking coffee from Sarah's favorite mug. "Clayton Riverside, you're under arrest for criminal sabotage of public infrastructure," Constance screamed, pointing dramatically at the drained lake bed. I stood up slowly, walked to my property line, and addressed the cameras directly. Folks, my name is Clayton Riverside, and I'm exercising federal treaty authority under the 1890 Territorial Water Compact to protect this watershed from environmental destruction. That resort has been stealing 2 million gallons daily without proper permits, killing fish and destroying tribal fishing grounds protected by federal law. I held up Henrik's Water Compact and the tribal environmental reports documenting ecological damage. The resort's business license claims they use 50,000 gallons daily for basic operations. They've actually been stealing 700 million gallons annually. That's not a business, that's environmental theft. Sheriff Martinez looked confused. County Attorney Peterson was frantically making phone calls. The Channel 7 reporter was asking Constance increasingly pointed questions about water permits and environmental compliance. Ma'am, can you explain why your resort is using 40 times more water than legally authorized? Translation: the mic had officially been dropped. The aftermath moved faster than a Minnesota thunderstorm. By Monday morning, the state attorney general's office had opened a criminal investigation into the resort's illegal water usage. The FBI expanded their corruption probe to include environmental crimes. The tribal government filed federal charges for violation of treaty fishing rights. Channel 7's coverage went viral. Videos of luxury yachts sitting in mud while spa guests wandered around empty pools spread across social media like wildfire. #luxury. Disaster and house water rights started trending regionally, turning Constance's business catastrophe into a national case study of corporate environmental arrogance. The resort filed for bankruptcy protection within 72 hours. Without water access, they couldn't operate any of their amenities. Insurance companies canceled policies citing failure to maintain minimum operational standards. The $12 million investment literally dried up, just like the lake. Constance's legal troubles multiplied exponentially. Criminal charges for water theft, civil violations for permit fraud, federal investigation for judicial corruption involving her husband. Judge Blackwood resigned in disgrace, facing his own criminal charges for ethics violations and trespassing. Within 2 weeks, the resort property was in foreclosure. The bank holding their construction loan wanted nothing to do with a luxury resort that couldn't access water legally. The property eventually sold at auction for $1.8 million, exactly 15% of the original investment. The new owners? A consortium led by the Gull Lake Ojibwe Band, who converted the failed resort into a tribal cultural center and environmental education facility. But the real victory was environmental restoration. Without the massive daily water theft, Paradise Lake returned to its natural levels within a month. Fish populations recovered as spawning grounds regenerated. The tribal fishing areas that had been destroyed by the resort's consumption patterns came back to life. I settled my lawsuit against the HOA for $750,000, enough to cover legal fees, property damage, and fund the environmental projects Sarah had always talked about starting. The HOA was disbanded and replaced with an elected community council that actually represents residents instead of developers. Jerry helped me build a new bridge to replace the one Constance destroyed. Not a replica of the original, but something better, a memorial bridge dedicated to Sarah and Henrik, built with materials designed to last another century. The inscription reads, "In memory of those who loved these waters and protected them for future generations." The Sarah Riverside Environmental Trust now monitors water quality throughout the watershed, provides legal assistance for communities facing environmental threats, and funds scholarships for Native American students studying environmental law. It's exactly the kind of legacy Sarah would have wanted, protecting places and people who can't protect themselves. Henrik's Dam still operates using the original manual controls, now maintained by tribal environmental staff who understand their historical significance. The water compact that started this whole fight has become a model for other communities seeking to protect natural resources from corporate exploitation. Constance disappeared from the area entirely. Last I heard, she was facing criminal charges in 3 different jurisdictions and had been banned from practicing real estate development in Minnesota. Her venture capital firm collapsed when investors discovered the extent of her legal problems. Sometimes justice arrives slowly, but when it does, it's thorough. These days, I spend my mornings walking across the memorial bridge to tend Sarah's garden and check the dam controls. The coffee tastes better out there, surrounded by wildflowers and the sound of water flowing at its natural pace. I still set 2 cups every morning. Some habits are worth keeping. The best part? 3 other communities have contacted the tribal legal team about researching their own historical water rights. Turns out Henrik wasn't the only pioneer who understood that protecting water meant protecting everything downstream. If you've got your own HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments below. Sometimes just telling your story starts the process of fighting back. And if this story reminded you why community accountability matters, hit that subscribe button. There's always another David versus Goliath battle brewing somewhere, and somebody needs to document when the little guy wins. Sarah used to say that love finds a way to flow around any obstacle, eventually wearing down whatever tries to block it. Took me a while to understand what she meant, but watching that lake return to life taught me everything I needed to know about persistence, patience, and the power of doing what's right. Water always wins in the end.